Hello, welcome to Excel 2016. We are now at the final lap of these Excel lessons marathon. Now we're going to look at a process of automating actions that are tedious and repetitive. We are going to look at the use of macro. Macros allows you to automate processes that you repeat so much that it becomes so tedious. So let's get on with that. Macros are found under the developer tab. As you can see here, we do not have the developer tab, so which means we have to activate it. In order to do that, we right click on any of this section here, right click, and we are going to customize the ribbon. Okay, if we click on that, we bring this Excel options dialog box, something you have seen before. If you look to the right hand side, you see that these some commands here are checked and others are not. One of those that are not checked is the developer. So if we click on developer and click OK, all of a sudden we should have the developer tab, which we do right here. So if we click on it now, we now see all the commands that we have under the developer tab, including, wait for it, macros. Okay, so you can record macros, you can use absolute or relative reference. We'll talk more about this later. And you can look into macro security. Macros are based on codes, so you can use the Visual Basic programming code, a form of early programming code that was developed by Microsoft, to make changes to edit the code that macros are based on. Okay, so as you can see at the moment, there's nothing on the screen. I want you to take your time to sort of play with this a little bit, and then we can start to develop our macros. Okay, now that we have set up our macro, our developer tab, and we have access to our macro, it's time to create our very first macro. What we're going to do, as I said before, macros are used for used for a lot of things, but they're mostly used for routinizing or automating processes that are tedious. That's something that you repeat every day. So in our case, for example, if you look on the left hand side, we have morning routine. So first we wake up, make our bed, drink a glass of water, yoga, shower, and then we leave for work. Or depends on the individual, right? So let's assume that every day we have to write this out, and this becomes very tedious, as you would expect. So we want to use macro to routinize this, so we don't have to type this out every day in Excel. All right, so let's do that. So what we do is we click on a cell where we want the macro to start. Two things first. Let's go to the developer tab. One of the most important things to note here is that Excel macros prefer you to type and not to click. So avoid typing, avoid clicking, copying and pasting and things like that. Especially if you can. Don't play very nicely. Sometimes it depends. Also, again, depends on what version of Excel you are on. But most importantly, it's probably better, at least in my experience with my program, it is better to use the Enter key to move from, for example, cell P1 to cell P2. So in order for that to work, though, you need to do something. You need to make sure the use absolute reference is activated by clicking on it. Remember, we talked about this before. So the Did I say use absolute reference? Actually, by default, it uses absolute reference. So what does that mean? That means that if I place my cursor here before I start running my macro, my Excel is going to use P1 as the absolute reference point. So it's going to jump to P2 and then P3, something like that. It's not going to continue the trend of T1, T2, and T3, right? So but if you use relative reference, which we're going to use, let me delete all this. If you use relative reference, it is going to stick to following the trend of using going one step to the bottom if you use the enter key. I hope I haven't confused you. All right, so let's do that. Let's click on the use relative references to make sure that's activated. That's the first thing to do. Don't forget, it's better to type and to use your enter key to move from one step to the other, which we're going to do. And the next thing to do now is to actually start recording your macros. All right, so in order to record macros, there are two ways you can do that. The first way is to click the button that says record macro, and the second one is if you go to the bottom left hand corner, you see a button there that if you put your cursor on it, say no more macros are currently click to begin recording a new macro. So in order to start recording, you can click on this icon here to start recording your macro. So let's use the top one for now. Okay, so before we start typing, it's going to ask us to name our macro. How about we call it morning routine? I forgot to tell you that macros do not like spaces, so you can either have them together or use underscore to join the words together. And where do you want to store the macros? By default, it stores in this workbook, but you can store anywhere else. For example, create a new workbook or personal macro workbook if you have one. It also asks for a shortcut key. We're not going to do that here. And it asks for a description. We can just call it itemizing is that with an S or with a Z? Itemizing morning routine before work. Okay, so we're going to click OK now, and then we have started recording. Anything we type now is going to be recorded. So let's do what we said. Morning routine. Wake up, make bed, drink glass of water, yoga, shower, and then leave for work. Okay, so we've done all we can, and we've typed out our morning routine. The next thing to do now is to either click the stop recording button here or go down to click stop recording. So let's use the bottom one now, the bottom icon now. Click, and we have stopped recording. Okay, so now what's next? The next thing is, how do we find our macros? Where are they? First, let's delete this. Okay, and test our macro by clicking on P1. If we go under the developer tab again on the right hand side, you see macros. If we click on that, you see our macro. So there are a couple of things we can do here. First, we can run our macro, we can step into it, we can edit it, we can even delete it. There are more options if you click here. But for now, let's just run the macro. Let's click on it and click run. And there you go. It is right there. Let me play that one more time. Macros, run. Okay, so that is how to create macros and how to run it. There's more of macros coming up, so stick with me and meet me on the other side. Okay, so the next step to look at here is how we can make changes, if we have to these items or to our macros. So let's delete this, delete that, and then go to macros. And instead of running a macro now, what we want to do is to step into it. By stepping into it, we are able to bring up this Visual Basics, this Visual Basic programming platform that allows us to make some changes here. We can deactivate certain part of these codes from running. For example, let's say we don't leave for work. Let's say after breakfast and get dressed and all of that, we work from home. We don't leave, right? So, and therefore we want to deactivate this cell here that says leave for work. So if you notice very carefully, you see that there is a pattern to this code right here. I'm not a coder, and I'm sure many of you are not, but if we look carefully, we'll see that there is a pattern here. For example, select active cell money routine, which is the first line of item that we wrote, and then the next offset one means go down to the cell below, one step below, and then we have wake up. Offset one again, we have make bed. Offset one again, we have drink glass of water. So like that, until that's how we typed, if you remember. So now, if we need to, if you look here, this sort of green color test, you see that there are apostrophes before them, and also in certain empty space. These apostrophe, also called comments in Excel, are used to represent lines of code that you don't want to appear when you run your macro. If you notice, itemizing money routine before work was a comment, right? It was a comment we entered in the macro, but when we run it, we don't see this. Okay, so if we need to deactivate any of these items, whether yoga, let's say we don't do yoga anymore, right? We don't want that to run in a macro. We can deactivate it by clicking beside it and put a comment. But for now, let's assume we don't leave for work, and we are going to deactivate that. All right, so we're going to go to that line that says leave for work and click right here, and then click the apostrophe. Okay, and as you can see, it changes to the green color, which means it's been deactivated. Now, how do we get back to Excel to see if this works? The way to do that is to click this button here. If you notice, we are under break, which means we are not necessarily running under Excel. So to get back to that, to get out of this break, we're going to click this button right here that says continue. So if we click on that, the break disappears, and now we can go to the left hand side and click on view Microsoft Excel, or use the alternate plus 11F key. So let's click on the Excel icon, and this brings us back here. If you notice now, leave for work is gone. So I'm going to delete this now, so we can run our macro again and see what happens on macros, and then run. As you can see, leave for work is no more there. So that is how to deactivate or remove a certain part of your macros. Now that the question is, why didn't we just delete it? Well, you could, but the problem is with codes, as some of you coders know, it's not really a good idea to delete codes that you're not necessarily familiar with, or you don't know how it will impact the rest of the code. So the best thing to do is to first of all deactivate it. If you see that it works and it doesn't break your code, then you can deactivate it. Okay? Okay, so our next step is to make changes to an already created macro. Let's say, for example, this looks very dull. It doesn't look very interesting at all. So as you know, the way to make it a little bit more interesting is to format it. Maybe change the color a little bit, increase the font size and things like that. So we're going to do that. We're going to click on the first one here, and we're going to go to, or we can start recording now, and then we are going to create, we're going to call this format my underscore again macro. Okay, and maybe now we can use a shortcut, but before you select a shortcut, it's important for you to remember not to use something that you use all the time. For example, you don't want to use Ctrl C because that's something that you use to copy, or Ctrl Z for undo, things like that. Those sort of regular shortkeys I use all the time should not be used here. So how about maybe we use Ctrl M. Okay, I think that makes sense. I don't think I use that a lot. So Ctrl M for running this particular macro. We are going to leave this store macro in this workbook as usual, and our description is going to be formatting my first macro. Okay, something like that. All right, and now we click OK. So now we are live. We can start recording now. So let's go to the home tab, and the first thing we want to do is we want to change the font size to let's say 20, and we also want to change, we want to underline it, and we want to bold it. Okay, so and the next thing to do is to click the enter key for the next item. That also we want to increase the font size to 12. We want to change the font to Bauhaus 93, and we are going to change the color to maybe let's say something interesting, and we're going to do the next one is going to be the same thing. Maybe start with changing the color and making bold. Actually remove that bold, and remember whatever you do here is going to be recorded. So change this to font 12 size, and it's called 95, and we are going to go to the next one, and 12, and color, and Bauhaus 95. We'll go to the next one, and color, and 12 for the font size, and the font type was 95. And the last one, color, 12 point, and font type Bauhaus 95. Okay, hope I'm pronouncing that right. But now we have make this a little bit nicer, so we can now stop our recording by going to a developer tab and clicking stop recording. Okay, so to run a macro, we are going to click on macros, and then click on select a macro and click run, and there we have it. We have a formatted macro being shown on the screen. I want you to play with this a little bit and then meet me on the other side. Sometimes it's easier to get to your macros in the quick access toolbar, and in order to do that you have to make it visible there. So let's do that. Let's make sure that we are able to use our quick access toolbar to play our macro, because it can be a little bit tedious to go under the developers tab and then macros. Okay, so let's click on this drop down menu here and click on more commands, and under the popular commands tab in the left hand side we click on macros. Now we can select the one that we want to include in our quick access toolbar. So we're going to click morning routine and add. Just okay that, and you can see here now that we have a macro icon here. So if I click on this, it should be able to give me my first macro.